Hopefully by now you understand that communication is everything. Communication with your spouse, your kids, your friends, your employees, the communication with your audience, the communication that you have inside of your content, aka your messaging, is everything. But I have a question for you. When looking at how you communicate, have you ever asked yourself, are you communicating from problems or solutions? Well, if you've never asked yourself that, or you don't even understand the difference, this episode is going to be incredibly powerful for you. We're going to flip the way you have been communicating. So if that's interesting to you, well, keep on listening. Hi, I'm Brandon Lucero, and you're about to experience the new way to thrive in business, entrepreneurship, and life by leaning into who you are, what you love, and standing up for what you want to create. Get ready, because this is where we go against the grain, say no to outdated society norms, and we say yes to change in order to create a happier, more fulfilled world. Welcome to the New Generation Entrepreneur Podcast. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the New Generation Entrepreneur Podcast. Today, we have a solo episode, which means I'm not interviewing anybody. And what we're going to talk about is the difference between problems versus solutions. And we are going to talk about this in multiple contexts, not contexts. I was made aware that that is not proper grammar. But we're going to use it in multiple contexts. And so we're going to start off in the messaging context, but this really at the end of the day is going to be a podcast about communication. And this is about communication when it comes to kids and your kids, your children, coworkers, employees, spouse, boyfriend, girlfriends, basically anyone. And I have, through this last year, have come to the conclusion, some of you may have already been to this conclusion, there's a lot of books written on it, but I don't know why it took me so long to realize this, especially since I teach communication and messaging, but I believe that a lack of communication is the cause of the majority of problems in the world. And these could be problems of you not connecting with your kid, or you and your wife or spouse or husband or friend not getting along. Usually disagreements and things like that are going to be from a conflict of two different perspectives, and both perspectives don't have the tools or the ability to communicate their perspective, and also aren't able to actually listen. They might hear, but they're not listening to the other perspective. And I mean listening without needing to interject or interrupt or give their opinion or their perspective on. And so remember, communication goes two ways. It is also listening, but it is also how you communicate. You need both for effective communication, both in marketing, both in copy, in content, but just in everyday communication. So when we look at problems versus solution, that's going to be kind of the theme of this episode. I want you to look at it start off by looking at it into the context of marketing. And so one of the biggest things that I see people have struggle with is that their headlines don't work, their subject lines, their titles aren't working, their communication doesn't work or resonate the way they want it to. And the reason why that happens, one of the reasons why that happens, is because most people are focusing on communication or marketing or messaging that stems from a solution, not the problem. And another way to say this is that people are not meeting their audience where they're at. They're trying to meet their audience where they are at. Okay, so let me give you a couple examples here so you can see the difference. Example number one, I'm just going to use myself. You guys all know that one of the things that we do is teach messaging, right? So we teach messaging and content. And a lot of the problems that people have with content actually stems from messaging. I would say like 3 to 4 years ago when we got started, people weren't aware that messaging was the problem. They weren't aware that they needed to fix their messaging. I would say today in this market, the awareness that messaging is the solution is 10 times what it was 3 years ago. So 3 years ago, if I knew that messaging was the solution and I crafted like an ad that said like, opt in and we're going to help you master your messaging or fix your messaging, we probably wouldn't have gotten a great response because I'm communicating from where I'm at, which is at the solution. But the audience doesn't know that that's the problem. So I want to focus my messaging on where they're at, and where your audience is at right now is at a problem. That's the only reason why they're going to buy from you, is because you can give them something that they can't get themselves. You're going to either help them with a transformation, you're going to give them education, you're going to help them with something, right? So really the only reason that people pay for anything is because you're giving them something they need or want. So they're at a problem. So instead of 3 years ago, instead of saying, opt in to master your messaging or help us with your messaging, I would look at what is the problem my audience is having right now? What are they having? What problem are they having? And I would look at that and go, okay, great. Their content is blending in. They're getting no engagement on their content. That's a pretty big problem, no engagement. So instead of saying opt in, I'm going to help you master your messaging, I'm going to say opt in to get our number one content engagement framework, or opt in to learn how to create engaging content in 30 days or less, right? So now what I'm doing is I'm crafting messaging, I'm crafting titles based on a problem that the audience is experiencing versus what I know the solution is. And there's so many of us, and I know there's a couple people listening, or maybe a majority of you listening right now, that are kind of like, oh crap, I have been communicating from the solution and not the actual problem. Now, again, sometimes they could be one and the same. Like right now, people are pretty well aware that they have a messaging problem. So I can meet them at the solution because their awareness is already there. But even then, I don't want to rely solely on the solution. I would say something like master your messaging so you can finally create engaging content. Now I'm meeting them with the solution and I'm meeting them with the problem. But again, I'm always trying to incorporate the problems into my messaging. That's where everything stems from. And I think so many of us try to talk about the benefits or the solution or why we're better. We don't need to understand why you're better. They just want a problem solved. Okay, so we have to shift our perspective. Like I said in the beginning of this episode, usually there is a conflict of perspectives and people lack the skills to be able to communicate through that conflict of perspectives. It's very simple. Understand where they're at, understand the exact problems, and create stuff that stems from that. Now, this is really comes down all from communication, and this is communication altogether. So, or this is all about how we communicate with everyone. So I'm willing to bet the same way that you communicate with your messaging and with your audience is probably the same way you might communicate with like your spouse, boyfriend, girlfriend, friends. It's just a communication style that you have. And you're usually trying to communicate from your perspective versus someone else's perspective. And this is where we start to run into problems. When we continue to only communicate from our perspective, we lack a huge, huge amount of awareness of the other person and their experience. And if you're trying to communicate or better their life or understand or have your message land with them, shouldn't you understand their perspective? Shouldn't you understand where they're at? Shouldn't you understand how their thinking is going? Because talking at someone, it hardly ever solves any conflicts. When we look at some of, if you get in a fight with, your spouse or boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever, usually what happens is when you make up, like maybe you guys are yelling, you're saying your perspectives. When you make up, what usually happens during the makeup talk is an understanding or at least a hearing out of their perspective. Here's how you made me feel. I'm sorry, I didn't see it that way. That's where resolution comes from, right? So if we know that the only way to make up after a fight is to really understand someone else's perspective and hear them out, why don't we just do that in the beginning of our communication so we can avoid the fight altogether? And again, it's the same thing with your kids. Why don't you understand your kids' perspective first before you start making demands and then you have to make up to them and then you yell at them or whatever it is, right? And I'll say right now, like some of the best conversations or moments that I've had with my kids is when I've been able to stop myself in the moment when they're screaming and I'm screaming and just get down on my knees and hug them and ask them, what's really going on? How are you feeling? Why are you yelling right now? What's making you frustrated? And then I hear their perspective and I listen. That's a part of communication, is listening. And then now I can adjust my communication to make sure my perspective lands with them because I have a better understanding of their perspective. So this idea of communication, it encompasses everything. It encompasses your marketing, it encompasses your messaging, it encompasses your relationships. It's everything. But again, it all stems from creating marketing, messaging, or communication from a problem someone's experiencing versus the solution. Again, I'll relate this back to relationships. My wife does not like it when I coach her. And so me as an entrepreneur, and maybe as a guy, I think a lot of guys are like this, I want to fix problems. That's what we do as entrepreneurs. So when she comes to me and she says, I'm having this problem, blah, 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 you know where I automatically go to? I go to the solution, which we don't want to do. We never want to start from the solution. And she just wants me to hear the problem. She wants me to understand the problem. So sticking with problems and understanding problems and starting communication at problems is almost always, I've never found a scenario where this isn't true, but starting with problems in your communication is always going to lead to better communication. Because when you stay at the problems, you better understand someone else's perspective. And when you understand someone's perspective, you can move them to a different perspective. So in order to change your communication, there's kind of 3 steps that I like to follow. Number 1 is I like to build rapport with people. And sometimes I think as business owners, we kind of forget to do that with our audience, or if we're coaching someone, we forget to do that with our coaching. Sometimes just building rapport in your copy, even if you have a direct response ad in your emails, building the rapport is absolutely necessary. Building the rapport is like building trust. It's building connection. And the easiest way for me to do this is meeting the person I'm communicating with, meeting them at their emotional state. Again, this is kids, spouses, so husbands, wives, girlfriends, boyfriends, even friends. This is during copy, right? When you're writing copy, coaching as well, meeting them at their emotional state. Things like, tell me more about this. I can see that you're frustrated, or I understand the emotion that you're going through. It feels like this, and that's not fun, right? It's validating their emotional state, understanding them, building rapport. That's always step number 1. This works really, really well, especially with kids. I think one of the best things I've done as a parent is focus on building rapport, taking my messaging philosophy and applying it to the communication with my kids. And that is part number 1, which is building that rapport and meeting them at their emotional state. If they're screaming and they're yelling, and then I start screaming and I start yelling, they're giving me their perspective, I'm fighting for my perspective, it hardly ever ends up in a great scenario. But when they're upset and I'm able to stop myself and I'm able to meet them where they're at, and I say, hey, Will, it looks like you're very frustrated right now, and it looks like you're very angry. Tell me about that. Why are you angry? I understand that you're frustrated. Tell me about that. It shifts everything. It shifts their language. It shifts their body language. It shifts their energy. It shifts their focus. And that moves me to step number 2, is the next thing that I like to do, is to validate it. Validate the emotion. Yeah, you know what? After hearing that, I would feel very frustrated too. I understand where you're coming from. That is a lot to deal with. You're totally right. You validate the emotions. It makes people know that they're heard. It allows them to feel heard versus just listened to or talked at. Again, this applies to marketing. This applies to messaging. It applies to everything. So build rapport and validate. So, an example of how this might work in copy, I might write an email that says, look, I understand what it feels like to be an unheard entrepreneur. You just want to climb to the top of the mountain and scream. I can help you. Just let me help you. And I understand why that's frustrating. I get why that's frustrating. And I understand the emotions that you're feeling. and they're totally normal. So just in that copy in an email, building rapport, I'm validating, but it's the same thing with everything. If you want to build rapport with your coaching clients, that's the steps that you should be taking. You want more connection with your kids. It starts with communication. You want more connection with your wife or husband or boyfriend or girlfriend or partner or whatever. Build rapport, meet them at their emotional state, and validate the emotions as step number one. This doesn't mean you interject with a solution. You don't give your perspective. You don't try to fix anything for them. You don't tell them why it's happening. You build rapport, meet them at their emotional state, and then you validate. And then the third step is understand what they want, not what you want or think they need. This is listening to what they want and not going to what you know they need or what you want them to know. This one's a little bit trickier, okay? So let me give you an example. If my son Will wasn't cleaning his room and we start yelling at each other and I stop and I ask him, hey, Will, it looks like or say to him, Will, it looks like you're really upset and you're really angry. I don't like it when you're angry. I want you to be happy. Can you tell me why you're angry right now? And he tells me, well, Dad, it's just that I built my Legos and, I don't want to destroy them. And I don't want to take them down. I worked really hard on this. Then I would validate his emotions. I understand that. That is really frustrating. You did take a lot of time on putting those Legos together. I totally get why you're frustrated. And then now I'm going to move to the third step, which is understanding what he wants, not what I want or what I think needs to happen. So now, because I'm calm, I can adjust the communication and see if we can figure out a solution. Hey, bud, I understand you don't want to break those. What if we put them on the shelf instead of taking them apart because we just really need the floor clean? Does that work? And now we avoided this entire conflict. We avoided a big problem. We avoided fighting. We built a deeper connection. He felt heard. I got what I needed, which was a clean floor, right? So it goes through those three steps. Build rapport through meeting them at their emotional state, validate their emotions, and then understand what they want, not what you want or what you think they need. Now, the big question is well, you go, well, Brandon, what if what they want isn't going to help them? Or what if the thing that I know they need is going to help figure out the solution? Well, that's fine. You can bring them to that point, but you never position it as, here's what you need to do. It's, I understand, I hear, here's what I was thinking, here's what I'm coming from. Do you think this would be a solution? You get their approval or they agree to you helping them. Ask them, can I help you? Can we talk about this? Do you want help fixing the problem? Sometimes when I talk to my wife and she tells me about something she's dealing with, I'll ask her, do you want me just to listen or are you looking for a solution right now? I want to give her the solution, but if she's not ready for it, then I don't give it and I just listen. And if she's ready for it, then I will give it to her. Okay. So that's the 3-step process that I use for communication all around, right? So I use it with my kids. I use it with my spouse. I use it with our coaching clients. I can do it over and over and over again. Okay. So, the big question is how does this translate over to messaging? We did talk about this a little bit. But really at the end of the day, when it translates over to messaging, it's going to be, because here's the thing, you can't ask your audience, do you want me to give you the solution? They just, you just need to give it to them. So it's a little bit different when it comes to messaging. But here's what I've noticed with messaging is that when messaging has a focus of problems and we focus from problems and it stems from problems, it's a lot easier for us to pull out emotional states. It's a lot easier for us to pull out mistakes. It's a lot easier for us to pull out problems. It's a lot easier for us to get specific on the things that actually matter to that person. Okay. So when we can focus on the problem, we can build rapport because we're meeting them at their emotional state, the emotional state of the problem. When we are looking for mistakes they're making to make them aware that these mistakes cause problems, we're meeting them at the problem. We're never meeting them at the solution. So our emphasis on messaging, our emphasis on marketing always stems from the problem. It shouldn't always stem or hardly ever stem from the solution. Okay, so I'm going to give you guys a little bit of a homework assignment or exercise. I want you to write down, and some of you may have done this with me if you're a student or you've watched a training that we've done. I want you to write down 3 columns on a piece of paper. This is going to drastically help you learn how to communicate, because a lot of the things people will hear this podcast and they're like, okay, Brandon, this makes sense. I get it as a concept, but I don't know how to actually implement it or do it. And when it comes to just communication with your kids and your wife or spouse, friends, mom, dad, whatever, it's very simple. Just follow the 3 steps that we focused on. It's meet them at their emotional state, build the rapport, validate, and then ask them if they want the solution or not. Listen to what they want versus what you want. And what's really interesting is usually when you give people what they want, you actually get what you want in return. It's very interesting how that works out. But let's go back to the messaging for a second. So I want you to write down 3 columns. On the far left column, write down problems. On the middle column, title it actions. And then on the column on the right, title it beliefs. Okay, so we have problems, beliefs, and actions. So if you're sitting here going like, Brandon, I have a solution. It's an amazing solution. People need to know about it. I just want to tell it to the world. Great. We're not going to start there. We're actually going to just write down 3 columns. No one cares about your solution right now, right? They just want their problem solved. So write down the problems that your audience is experiencing. I can tell you right now that if you can't tell me 3 specific problems that you solve for people, you have messaging issues, or your messaging can be improved, because all messaging should stem from problems, because that's what you solve for people. Now, for every problem that you wrote down, what I want you to do is to think of an action. What action are they taking that is causing that problem? They are unaware that that action is causing the problem. Otherwise, they wouldn't be doing it. Okay. Now let's take it one step deeper. No one takes an action unless there's a belief that they hold that's causing them to take that action. So if there's problem number 1, there's an action that's causing problem number 1, but then there's a belief that's causing that action to happen in the first place. So let me give you an example. Problem number 1 that my audience has is they haven't seen significant growth in their audience or sales in 3 months or more. The action they're taking is that their content is usually 70% how-to educational content. The belief they have is that how-to educational content is how to grow a business online and the best way to add value to someone's life. So now what I did is I have a problem, an action, and a belief. I know the solution is messaging. So instead of walking up to you and saying, hey, do you want to fix your messaging? Now what I can do is walk up to you and say, hey, are you struggling to grow your audience? Like, you probably haven't grown your audience in 3 months or brought in sales, seen a significant growth in audience or sales in like 3 months. Am I right? The person goes, yeah, that is totally me. And then I go, I'm willing to bet that you're also probably doing like 70% how-to content, educational content, right? And they go like, yeah, that is me. And then I say, I'm also willing to bet that you probably believe that pushing out how-to educational content is the best way to add value. And they go, yeah, I do believe that to be. That's what everyone says. Now, do you guys see how I'm meeting that person where they're at versus meeting them at the solution? I didn't walk up to them and say, hey, do you need help with messaging? Because they're going to go, no, I'm good. Or what is messaging? And then you have to try to explain what messaging is and then hope that they are like, yeah, I kind of need that. No, we don't want to do that. I want them to subconsciously automatically go, that's exactly me. That is my problem. Those are my actions. That is my belief. That is me in a nutshell. I'm meeting them where the problem is. My communication starts with them and their perspective, hearing them out, validating them, hearing what they need. And once I have that connection with them, once I have the information of their perspective, I now can guide them to an alternate perspective. So now that I know their problem, now that I know their action, now that I know their belief, I can say, well, have you ever thought about that what you're saying in that content matters most? Have you looked at Gary Vaynerchuk and realized that he doesn't do tutorials and not do content, but he grows really fast? He sees significant growth in his audience. Have you ever thought about maybe focusing on messaging and polarizing messaging? And now now they're way more open to it. Now they're way more receptive to it. Now I can bring them, I met them where they were at, and I can bring them to where I'm at. There's no longer a collusion? Yeah, that's right. Sorry, it sounded weird when I said it. A collusion still sounds weird. There's no longer a conflict of perspectives. And it starts because I met them where they're at. And this tool of communication will improve everything inside of your lives. Try it. Try it out tonight. Listen to your wife, listen to your kid, listen to your children. Ask them questions about how they're feeling. How does it make you feel? Why is that happening? How do you think we should fix the solution? What if we did? Have you ever thought about maybe doing this instead? Again, meet them at their emotional state, validate them, listen to what they want. And then now the communication can start of like, okay, I hear what you want. Here's what I'm trying to do. How do we work together on coming up with a solution? That is a much more powerful way to fix anything. Now, this also works with employees, right? So like how you work with employees or team or contractors. Like one of the biggest things that I had to deal with building a team is because I never had a team before, is how do we start to communicate with them when something needs to get fixed without demoralizing them or, keeping morale up high. Because here's the thing, like your team's not going to do everything perfectly. And you're not, just like you're not either, right? You're not going to do everything perfectly. They're not going to do everything perfectly. There's going to be things that need to get improved on. So how do we start the communication with bringing that up? It's the same process. Meet them at their emotional state, validate, understand what they want or what they were thinking, and then now we can move to a middle ground. So, if my team had a really good marketing plan that they were going to deploy over like 90 days, and I look at that and I see some big red flags or things that I don't want to do, but I know they spend a ton of time on it, I'm going to meet them at their emotional state. I'll say something like, look, guys, it looks like you guys spent a lot of time on this. It looks like you're really excited about it. And it looks like you're really proud of this as well. And you should be, because this took a lot of work. So I'm moving into the validation. This took a lot of work. And I really, really appreciate all the hard work that you put into this. And now I'm going to move into the last step, which is understand what they want. But what it looks like you guys want is you want to be as successful as possible. You want this to really work out. You really, really want this to produce these types of results. I actually think we might be able to adjust this to help you guys better reach those results. Here's what I'm going to recommend. And I'm going to be pretty firm on this just because of my past experience has guided me to led me to knowing that this might not work very well. This idea that you had here. So can we adjust it there? What do you guys think? Yeah, sure. We can adjust it. Or no, we still think this is the best way. And then I just go through that process again. Look, I understand that you're really compassionate about it. I would be too. I'm just going to have to put my foot down on this one. We can do other things because I just going with my intuition and blah, blah, blah. But again, I appreciate the hard work and I'm really lucky to be able and grateful to have amazing employees like you. And so that style of communication builds the rapport. It keeps people happy. It starts to dismantle, again, the conflict of perspectives. Now, my team is probably going like, Brandon, you never talk to us like that. like that. But I have started to. And the reason why I'm bringing this up and the reason why I know this works is because this is now the way that I've starting to communicate with my family, with my wife, and even with some of the employees on the team as well. And that's been my biggest struggle over the years is just not understanding how to communicate. And I've always wanted to communicate from a solution first, or my perspective first, or from my emotional state first. Those are usually the three defaults that I would go to. And I've learned and seen the damage that can have on a relationship, a marriage, with your kids, with your employees, with the team, them being demoralized. I just see the damage that happens when we have such a lack of communication. Because people are holding too tightly on their automated responses, their emotions and their perspective. But ironically, what happens is when we can learn to let go of those, our relationships and even the relationship we have with our audience starts to bloom. And ironically, again, is you start to get more of what you want. when we focus on our customers or our audience first and we meet them where they're at, a much bigger rapport and connection is built. And what do we get on the back end? We get happy customers who trust us. The audience starts to convert into actual customers. So by letting go of our perspectives and meeting them where they're at and changing our emotional states and letting go of our perspective to better understand and having that in our communication actually yields more results of what we want. You know, like the same thing with your spouse. You want your spouse to try something new, like go play tennis or something, and they don't want to. And you start that communication and you better understand and you listen, and they are happier and they're more connected. They're 10 times more likely to then be open to things that you might want too. Like, yeah, let's go give tennis a try. I don't know, maybe I'll like it. So again, this all comes from me experiencing those problems and learning how to adapt this into my life. And it has been nothing but amazing. And it's the same concept, but you can use it in all areas of your life, including messaging. So remember to start with problems, understand people's emotional states, validate them, understand what they want, and then you can start the transition to the solution. And there you go. So that's how we start to focus on problems versus solutions. It's how we change everything. And again, it all stems with communication. So if you enjoyed this episode, let me know. And if you try this out, let me know. Like, send me a DM, tag me on Instagram, or do whatever, because I would love to hear how this has improved your communication or relationship with your kid, spouse, audience, team, or whatever. So let me know, and I'll see you all on another episode of the New Generation Entrepreneur. Hey guys, thank you so much for checking out another episode of the New Generation Entrepreneur podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, go below, hit the subscribe button, and make sure you click on that bell icon and get notified every time we drop a new episode. Now, if you're looking for the show notes, we have them linked underneath this video, as well as our social media handles and some links to free training and offers that we drop from time to time to help you guys even further. So go check those out if you're interested. And thank you so much for tuning in to the New Generation Entrepreneur podcast.